This is a recently concluded suspense drama by Lee Man-ki, and today we are here to explain this Face Me. The story begins. The male protagonist, Michael, is the best plastic surgeon in Korea. Not only can he easily identify post-surgery complications, but he can also sense various wounds and devise the best plastic surgery plans. This has attracted many beauty seekers. On this day, a father brought his daughter for consultation. He claimed that his daughter was scalded by sudden hot water while bathing. Michael immediately saw through the lie. After all, when a person comes into contact with hot water that can cause second-degree burns, their hands would instinctively react. However, the girl only had scars on her face. Therefore, Michael refused the surgery, citing that the cosmetic hospital does not perform reconstructive surgery. The girl's father did not accept this explanation and went straight to the front desk to cause a scene. He shouted that the hospital only cared about breast augmentations and making money while looking down on poor patients, completely disregarding everything else. He even threatened to smash up the hospital. Fortunately, he was stopped in time, or he would have faced police investigation and compensation charges. In reality, the hospital never offered reconstructive surgery as a treatment option in the first place. The front desk had only relented under the father's persistent pleading. For Michael, as long as patients followed the procedure and personally signed the consent forms, he would proceed with the surgery, even if the patients suffered from depression or anxiety. He never probed into their pasts or verified anything. For him, only the final outcome of the surgery could represent the patient's correct choice. However, with the medical disturbance being widely exposed, Michael's remaining surgeries were all canceled. But there was still one girl who came for a consultation. She cautiously told Michael that she wanted every part of her face done, hoping to completely transform into someone else. However, Michael noticed her anxious demeanor, as well as her natural double eyelids and lip shape, and suggested that she think it over carefully, whether she truly wanted such a drastic change in her appearance. He told her that if she really needed the transformation, she could come back to the hospital later. Michael's attitude of sometimes agreeing to help people and sometimes not led others to believe that he was considering the patient's emotional well-being. However, the hospital director felt that Michael wasn't taking his feelings into account, which made him a little angry. Not long after, the director hurriedly stopped Michael, as an emergency situation had occurred. It turned out that the girl who had just left the hospital was harassed by a man. In a panic, she pushed him away, but unexpectedly, the man picked up a bottle and violently struck her. As a result, the girl's face now had extensive skin tears, and her orbital bone fracture caused pressure on the extraocular muscles, leading to eye muscle paralysis. She needed reconstructive surgery immediately. Michael refused without a second thought, as he was merely a cosmetic surgeon at the hospital, and such emergencies needed to be sent to a general hospital. However, after the director's heartfelt persuasion and the helpless look in the girl's eyes, Michael eventually softened. The next day, Detective Lee approached Michael. She explained that no relevant evidence was found at the crime scene. The surveillance footage was blocked by a car and only captured the man falling to the ground. The man even insisted that he was on his way to an underground bar and had accidentally encountered the girl, claiming that the two had merely been fighting each other. Detective Lee hoped that Michael, with his keen observational skills, could provide an assessment report on the girl's injuries to prove that her wounds were not caused by a single strike but by repeated blows to the cheekbone. This would establish that the man's actions constituted deliberate assault. However, Michael flatly rejected Lee's request, stating that unless she obtained a search warrant, he would not disclose the patient's medical information. Not long after, the man was released due to insufficient evidence, as authorities were unable to apply for his detention. His lawyer had advised him to stay quietly at home, but instead, he went straight after the girl, who had just been discharged from the hospital. As the girl was about to face another violent attack, Detective Lee fortunately discovered that the man's phone had a tracking app installed. She also learned that although he was a frequent visitor to underground bars, the incident occurred on a public holiday when the bar was closed. Realizing this, Lee rushed to intervene. However, she was a step too late. As the man was preparing to drive off, Lee attempted to follow him, but her path was blocked by another vehicle. Just then, Michael happened to pass by after work. Lee immediately stopped him and explained the situation. Along the way, Lee used the extensive surveillance network to quickly lock onto the man's location. Michael caught up with him, forcing his car to stop. Lee seized the moment, smashed the car window, and pulled him out, arresting him for kidnapping, unlawful detention, assault speeding, and violating the Anti-Stalking and Harassment Prevention Act. While Michael was examining the girl's injuries, she held up her phone with a look of relief. It turned out that when she was first kidnapped, she had considered escaping, but she remembered Michael's words, "Changes to appearance are possible, but other changes must come from within oneself." Inspired by this, she not only gave up on fleeing but also secretly recorded a video. Throughout the ordeal, she deliberately provoked the man with words to extract incriminating evidence against him. Meanwhile, the perpetually late colleague found a tracking device hidden in the back of the car. Soon after, the media aired the story of a detective and doctor working together to rescue a victim. Although the public response was overwhelmingly positive, Michael remained preoccupied and burdened with his thoughts. Michael was once a general surgeon. On the day he was trying on a suit, he unexpectedly witnessed a car accident. As a doctor, he stepped forward to save lives, and although the patient survived, his fiancée, waiting at home, was tragically murdered. While Michael rushed back in a panic, he himself was involved in a car accident. That same night, a community reported a case of a fatal fall. Detective Lee discovered that the deceased was the same man, the father, who had caused a scene in Michael's office earlier. On his body, they found what appeared to be a suicide note. In it, he wrote that Michael was a despicable doctor who used patients to package himself as a righteous and heroic figure. The scene shifts. Just as the girl stepped into the bathroom, the boy followed closely behind. When the door opened again, the trembling girl had left a slash across the boy's face. However, what was strange was that when Ming was taken away by the police, he requested to go to a plastic surgery hospital to save his face. At the same time, Detective Lee was preparing to let the girl recount the incident. However, her boyfriend jumped in first, claiming that Ming was a pervert who had tried to harass his girlfriend. He explained that, while playing games, he had noticed Ming pretending to clean up while sneaking peeks at his girlfriend's legs. Initially, he had chosen to ignore it, but things escalated when Ming deliberately approached under the guise of picking up a fallen drink bottle. On top of that, Ming bumped into chairs and tables while cleaning the floor, causing him to lose the game. However, considering that Ming was cleaning the floor and his girlfriend's attempt to stop him, the boyfriend forgave Ming. Coincidentally, his girlfriend had to use the restroom, which gave Ming the opportunity to follow her. When he caught up, he found his girlfriend looking panicked. Thankfully, she had the habit of carrying a knife for self-defense, or the consequences could have been unimaginable. Detective Lee, understanding the girl's emotional state, planned to take her for psychological counseling. However, as soon as they arrived at the hospital, the girl claimed that she wasn't hurt and didn't want to be subjected to unnecessary judgment. Seeing that the girl was unwilling to receive treatment, Lee quickly understood her intentions. She then closed the car door, opened the recorder on her phone, and asked the girl to continue recounting the events. The girl explained that as soon as she exited the stall, she found Ming blocking the door and slowly approaching her. He then ripped her clothes, and in a moment of panic, she instinctively swung the knife. After recounting the events, the girl asked Lee if her actions would be considered self-defense. While it appeared to be, as of now, Lee was unsure. However, when the girl heard that she would need to go to the evidence collection center to take samples of the stains on her clothes and belongings, her expression grew nervous. The evidence collection was soon completed, but the results would take some time. In the meantime, Lee noticed that the girl's boyfriend's shoes were stained with blood. She asked him to take them off so they could perfectly reconstruct the scene. On the other hand, Michael, who usually didn't handle this type of surgery, found himself dragged into the case due to the suicide incident. It turned out that May's father had chosen to jump off a building after Michael refused to perform reconstructive surgery for his daughter. The police discovered that the deceased's home was very clean, with no blood stains or traces of a struggle, ruling out the possibility of an intruder. At this point, Detective Lee, with her sharp eyes, noticed that the deceased's shoes and jacket were freshly cleaned. More importantly, the calendar in his home recorded his upcoming schedule. Through her search, Lee found that he had an appointment at another cosmetic surgery clinic. All the signs pointed to the fact that the deceased had been desperately trying to find a hospital to help his daughter, which made it highly unlikely that he had suicidal tendencies. However, the neighbors next door hadn't heard any suspicious noises. Now, with no witnesses and the community's surveillance footage being tampered with, the case was complicated further. May also believed her father's death was a suicide and just wanted everything to end. Reluctantly, the police had to temporarily rule it as an accidental death. Still, there was a puzzling detail. Although the deceased had been on antidepressants and was drunk at the time of death, the discovery of a lung cancer diagnosis among his belongings raised questions. This suggested that, in his final days, he was desperately trying to ensure his daughter would get the surgery, no matter the cost. Just then, Lee noticed May about to leave and hurried after her. She wanted to help May understand her father's intentions. To Lee's surprise, May revealed the truth. Everything her father had done was an attempt to ease his guilt. The burns on her face were the result of an accident caused by her father, who, in a drunken state, had unintentionally hurt her when her mother left home. That mistake had ruined her life. May didn't want any further revelations about her father's criminal past or his suicide to expose her final, personal secrets. She just wanted to forget everything as quickly as possible. Lee understood May's feelings, as she had once faced the same emotions and had even considered escaping. Now, all she wanted was to help May. However, the situation escalated quickly. The suicide note left by the deceased placed Michael in the spotlight, leading to widespread criticism. Not only did it affect all of his surgeries, but it also raised doubts from his partners. In an effort to restore Michael's reputation, the hospital director contacted various reporters and publicly announced that the hospital would cooperate with the police and offer medical support to the victims free of charge, with Michael himself performing the surgeries. However, Michael agreed to perform surgery only 3 times, and Ming was one of the cases. Soon, Michael had successfully sutured Ming's wounds, and just as Lee arrived at the hospital to take Ming away, an unexpected incident occurred. It turned out that Ming was a transgender woman, and her prosthetic had become severely infected, requiring immediate removal. During the surgery, Lee took the time to reassess the situation. Ming's gender identity was female, but her appearance often led to misunderstandings when she entered restrooms, and this created doubts regarding the sexual assault allegations. Now, Ming was also afraid of revealing her privacy, so Lee had to approach the case from another angle. Lee recalled how nervous the girl had been during the evidence collection process, which further confirmed her suspicions. A few days later, when Lee received the bloodstain pattern analysis report, she immediately arrested the girl's boyfriend. Meanwhile, when Ming left the hospital, Michael provided an important clue. By analyzing the depth of the wounds, it was clear that the person wielding the weapon was taller than Ming. Faced with the concrete evidence Lee presented, the boyfriend confessed to the truth. He admitted that he had pushed Ming into the restroom and attacked her with a knife out of anger because she had caused him to lose his game. His girlfriend, under persistent pressure, had agreed to provide false testimony to cover for him. Since then, this case has come to an end. At the same time, May's father's case also had new leads. Not only did a car owner provide the driving records from that night, but the neighbor next door also recalled the events of that evening. She was very drunk at the time, but vaguely remembered someone passing by the door. Although she only saw their back, she noticed that the person's shoes seemed to have something inside them. The young officer suspected that since it was a homicide and involved Michael, it was likely the work of an enemy. In this case, Michael might be in danger. The truth turned out to be as they suspected. Watching the suspect charge towards Michael, fortunately, Lee intervened in time and altered the direction of the attack, allowing Michael to escape danger. Meanwhile, the female model Max had just left the set when she was stopped by a stranger. The liquid suddenly splashed onto Max, causing her to scream in pain. Although the suspect, Ding, was quickly apprehended, she acted clueless about her motive. She claimed to be a maid, and that her employer had suddenly fired her. She said she was simply taking a walk in the park and had no memory of the events that followed, insisting she did not know Max. Seeing that the woman couldn't provide any useful information, Lee went to the hospital to check on Max's condition. Max's face had suffered second-degree burns from hydrochloric acid, and the internal damage might be even more severe. Thinking about her modeling career, Max didn't know where to go from here. Lee approached and quickly comforted her, saying that they would find the best plastic surgeon to try to restore her appearance. He also asked about her relationship with Ding, but Max claimed not to know her. The case had once reached a standstill. However, Lee noticed that Max had the habit of posting updates online, which also included real-time location information. In no time, Lee found Michael. After observing, he realized that Max had previously undergone surgery for cheekbone implants. Fortunately, the extent of the burns did not affect the implants, but to prevent infection before surgery, the implants had to be removed. When Lee returned to the police station, the young officer mentioned that they had already contacted the employer. However, the employer believed Ding to be an honest person and wouldn't do such a thing. The employer also asked the police to investigate thoroughly. The police station had also checked all the surveillance footage, and everything seemed normal. The impression given was that Ding had launched an attack with no specific target in mind. What puzzled the young officer was that Ding did not seek legal assistance, but instead insisted on finding her husband. After Lee interrogated Ding, she initially believed that the reason she had ended up like this was because of her husband. She claimed she had witnessed the woman in the red dress, the mistress, leaving with her husband. Just after Lee finished questioning Ding, Michael found her. He immediately asked if the driver who hit him was the same person who had murdered May's father, because May had come to the office to inquire about who killed her father. At first, Michael was confused, but he soon understood when May explained that she had overheard a conversation between the officers the previous night. The suspect might have a grudge against Michael and had used her father's death as a way to ruin Michael's reputation. Lee could only scratch her head to cover her awkwardness. This was because, when she arrived at the hospital the previous night, she had seen Michael leaving, with someone following him closely behind. The person's outfit resembled that of the suspect in the falling case, which led her to chase after them. During the chase, she also checked the vehicle information of the person, which turned out to be a stolen car from hours earlier. Soon, the suspicious vehicle was found, and the driving records were extracted. However, after technical analysis, it was determined that although the two suspects' clothing was similar, the video quality was poor and the footage brief, making it impossible to compare distinguishing features. Therefore, Lee told Michael that it was impossible to determine whether they were the same person. She also wanted to know who Michael's enemies were, but Michael claimed he had no enemies before leaving the station. In reality, Michael knew there was only one person he had made an enemy of, the person who had killed his fiancée years ago. At that time, he had demanded the public release of this person's information, but the police had refused. In his anger, he had confronted the individual and ripped off their mask, exposing their face to the media spotlight. Soon after, Lee contacted Ding's husband. This man was openly with his mistress and stated that Ding not only knew what the mistress looked like but also often stalked him. He suspected that Ding's actions were the result of depression, which led her to do something foolish in a moment of anger. However, Lee found out that Ding had no psychiatric treatment records. The husband confessed that having mental health records would negatively impact a divorce, so he guessed Ding must have borrowed a friend's name. Before long, an unscrupulous blogger blew the situation out of proportion, twisting the facts into a narrative of a mistress seeking revenge on the wife. When Lee returned to the station, she received notification that Ding was suffering from depression and delusions, along with mental weakness. And considering it was her first offense and her troubled family background, she wouldn't be detained. However, let's get started. Lee couldn't shake the feeling that everything was too coincidental. The perfect timing, the appearance of the husband who willingly provided the criminal motive, and the way this influence was steering their investigation. In order to uncover the truth, Lee came up with a new plan. She intentionally blocked Ding, who had been released, and casually revealed Max's medical address. Sure enough, Ding quickly dismissed her lawyer. That night, after disguising herself, Ding sneaked into Max's hospital room. Initially, it seemed like she was planning something, but instead, she took out her phone and began taking pictures of the patient. Everything she did was captured by the surveillance cameras inside the room. After finishing, Ding rushed to a certain neighborhood, seemingly to report to someone. Meanwhile, Max, now back in her room, peeled off large bandages, gazing at her gruesome scars. She thought about the misunderstandings with her lover and the ups and downs of her career. Helplessly, she could only fantasize about her past dreams. At that moment, she had lost all motivation to keep going. Fortunately, Michael managed to save her in time. Meanwhile, Lee followed Ding to a luxury mansion. The young officer was curious how Lee always seemed to know exactly what was going to happen. It turned out that earlier in the day, Lee had intentionally shown Ding photos of other victims, knowing that she wouldn't recognize Max. This way, Lee had anticipated that Ding would go to the hospital to take pictures, and then confirm with the person behind her if she had completed the task. At the same time, the person behind the instructions was Sarah, the wife of Max's former employer. While Ding had successfully completed the task, the arrogant Sarah decided to pay her and send her on her way. However, Ding slowly picked up coffee from the table, stared at it for a few moments, and then made as if to throw it at Sarah. Ding had realized that by pretending to be crazy and playing the fool, she could ruin others' lives at will, without worrying about legal consequences. In other words, she wanted more money. To prove her point, Ding even pulled out a recording of their conversation as a form of blackmail. Soon after, Ding left the mansion with a large sum of cash. Little did she know, before she even got into her car, the young officer had tampered with the taxi's dashboard camera. Lee and the young officer speculated that there must have been some kind of transaction between the two, but without concrete evidence, they couldn't act on it. To prevent Ding from claiming the illicit money as a maid's bonus, they needed to check her recent spending records. Given that she had gone to collect money in the middle of the night, it was clear she was in urgent need of funds. Therefore, they also had to track her recent whereabouts. Not long after, Lee received news that Ding had frequently visited a cosmetic surgery clinic, and they had even found her appointment records. The next day, there was a new lead in the case. Lee blocked a man in front of Max's hospital room. According to witnesses, Max's case was related to her former employer, as she had been not only a close friend of the daughter, but also a model under the employer's agency a year ago. The scene shifted, and Lee explained the entire story to Max, hoping that she would reveal the truth from that time. Only by doing so could they capture the real culprit and clear Max and her friend of the misunderstandings. It turned out that a year ago, Max had accidentally discovered that her former employer had been exploiting her friend. She secretly recorded it and reported it, but the outcome was not what she expected. Not only did her former employer end up in prison, but her friend also committed suicide shortly afterward. Soon after, Lee arrested Sarah on charges of inciting harm. This time, the evidence was overwhelming, and Sarah couldn't escape. After Ding was captured at the cosmetic surgery clinic, she quickly confessed to everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. The following day, she revealed their phone records, as well as the criminal plan involving Sarah and her husband's written correspondence. However, while Sarah admitted to the crime, she harbored malice and believed that Max deserved what happened to her. In Sarah's view, a successful man could occasionally stray without harm, but Max had meddled in things that didn't concern her, causing her husband to end up in prison. With that, the meticulously planned acid attack case aimed at disfiguring Max was solved. A few days later, Max returned to the stage. Although she had once considered giving up, Michael had persuaded her to rethink when she was about to go out for revenge. He told her that true vengeance wasn't just about taking the life of the enemy. It was also about not giving up on life, as the wrongdoers might have wanted. Now Max was ready to face the upcoming challenges, to confront her life and the scars on her face, and to present herself to the world as she was. However, reality was harsh. In a world that values appearance, Max didn't achieve any major success at first. Nevertheless, she was willing to bear the pressure, and her courage to face the injustice and her relentless spirit of challenge moved a brand. As a result, they hired Max as their East Asia model representative. At the same time, there was new progress in the falling case. The video quality was clear, and the suspect wasn't wearing a mask, though his hat was pulled very low. However, Lee couldn't shake the feeling that the suspect seemed familiar. She decided to find Michael, but by coincidence, she saw him chasing the suspect. She quickly got out of the car and took a shortcut to intercept him. What surprised her was that she ran into someone she knew. Back when Lee was just starting out as a female officer, her first field assignment had involved a major case. Yet, when facing the suspect, she had been too afraid to make eye contact and had instead avoided confronting the situation, hiding off to the side. Even when visiting the suspect privately, she had disguised herself. The suspect, John, had begged Lee for help with the investigation, but the evidence was overwhelmingly against him. The crime scene, the body, and the murder weapon were all covered in his fingerprints. Furthermore, John's urine drug test came back positive, and he had prior convictions for theft and violence. All the evidence pointed to him as the killer. 7 years later, Lee saw John again and was perplexed as to why he was still near the victims. John showed no hesitation and bluntly claimed that it was Michael who had ruined his life. He explained that when he was handed over to the police back then, Michael had suddenly burst in and ripped the mask off his face, exposing him to the media. The widespread publicity turned him into a national focus, with the public demanding the harshest punishment for him. As a result, no one, whether prosecutor, judge, or lawyer, would listen to his side of the story. Now, after his release, John only wanted to return the life that had been ruined to its original course. After saying this, John tried to leave, but Lee wasn't about to let him go so easily. She prepared to arrest him on the spot. Unexpectedly, John resisted, and in the struggle, he accidentally scratched Lee's arm. Seizing the opportunity, John managed to escape the scene. As soon as Michael arrived at the scene, he was eager to know if Lee had gotten a good look at the suspect. However, Lee remained silent. Michael already had his suspicions, so he went to the police station to check if John had been released from prison. Unfortunately, South Korean regulations stated that only the victim or the victim's lawyer could access an inmate's information. Since Michael's fiancée was dead, he couldn't get support from the prosecutor's office. Left with no other option, Michael reluctantly left the station to find another way. Just as he got back to his car, he noticed Lee's phone ringing. He answered, and after a brief conversation, they agreed to meet at Michael's home. It turned out that after returning to the office, Lee had checked John's records and discovered that he had just been released from prison 2 days ago. Coincidentally, this was the same time the incident involving Michael's fall occurred. Lee had planned to make a call to inquire more, but realized her phone was left at Michael's place. Lee then went to Michael's house, and before they could exchange more than a few words, they heard a loud crash, followed by a woman's scream. Rushing over, they found one person lying in a pool of blood, while another claimed it was due to a delivery accident. Lee immediately chased after the suspect, and just as he was about to flee on his bike, she managed to rush forward and kick him off. She quickly apprehended the suspect. The woman explained that she and Jay were cousins. She had dropped the payment for the delivery when picking it up, and when closing the door, she accidentally stepped on the man. She thought he was angry at her and wanted to hurt her in retaliation. Jay rushed over to try and stop the other person, resulting in a physical altercation. However, due to his smaller build, he was pushed into a mirror, causing the glass to shatter and the shards to fall onto his face. Meanwhile, Kim cried out in protest, insisting that when she entered, there was already blood everywhere. She claimed that the other person, seeing she was a delivery worker, tried to frame her and make her take the blame. However, Lee's investigation revealed that Kim had a criminal record, including charges for burglary, assault, and other similar offenses. She was currently on probation. Furthermore, when Kim was on her way to Michael's house, she had encountered him in the elevator, where she had threatened a colleague with harm if they dared to give her a bad review. Once this information came to light, it was clear Kim was terrified of her past criminal history coming back to haunt her. That fear made her flee quickly, but it also explained her behavior. Kim admitted that, despite her desire to change and live a better life, her past always made her a target for judgment, and as a result, people often ignored or disregarded her intentions. Lee looked at Kim, who was emotionally distressed and helpless, and suddenly remembered that years ago, John had also cried out in protest, hoping that Lee would help investigate. However, she had ignored him due to his criminal record. To her surprise, she learned that Kim and John were actually siblings. The next day, Lee went to see May and showed her a picture of John, asking if she had ever seen him. May, upon seeing the photo, became agitated, thinking that this man was the one who had killed her father. She recalled seeing him at her father's funeral hall. Meanwhile, John was hiding in a small apartment, keeping a close watch on Michael, as though he had some new plan in mind. On the other side, Jay did not choose to go to the emergency hospital, but instead insisted on being treated at a plastic surgery clinic. However, Kate preferred that the wounds be simply stitched up. Michael made it clear that while the other wounds had been simply sutured, the ear injury required the use of cartilage from the other ear for reconstruction, meaning Jay needed to be hospitalized and wait until the following day for the surgery. Not long after, Lee documented Jay's statement. However, his version of events was almost identical to Kate's. As she was about to leave the hospital, she was unexpectedly stopped by Michael. In fact, Michael wanted to ask Lee to help investigate whether John had been released from prison. However, Lee, in a somewhat flustered state, immediately rejected the request and tried to change the subject. Luckily, Michael didn't notice her unease. Instead, he raised another issue. He pulled out a piece of glass shard from near Jay's chin, pointing out that the wound in this area was clearly 2 centimeters deeper than the others. The direction of the injury was also different, and the cut was jagged and irregular. Before Michael could finish, Jay barged in, eagerly asking about the duration of the surgery. He also noticed the glass shard in Lee's hand. Lee explained that it was a report from the doctor to the police. Once Jay left, Michael continued with the conversation, pointing out that the wound on Jay's chin didn't look like a result of falling, but rather appeared to be caused by a stabbing. Lee then returned to the crime scene to conduct a more thorough inspection. While examining the area, she noticed a pair of slippers on the floor and decided to take them for further analysis. In the living room, she also found intimate photos of Jay and Kate, which led her to immediately contact a junior officer to re-investigate their relationship. Next, Lee headed to the Evidence Collection Center, where she requested that the glass shard from Jay's chin and the marks on the slippers be compared to see if they matched. At the same time, Michael happened to notice someone crouched by the door of the hospital room, eavesdropping. At first, he didn't pay much attention to it, but after entering the room, he noticed that Kate was persistently asking about the content of the opinion report. Jay quickly intervened and stopped her, which piqued Michael's curiosity. As he returned to his office, Michael became increasingly suspicious. Kate's explanation about the deepening of the wounds seemed particularly panicked, and she had a habit of always appearing to listen in the hallways. Additionally, Jay's sudden interruption during her conversation with Lee seemed odd. Driven by suspicion, Michael crouched down to check under the desk, where he discovered surveillance equipment. He then cross-referenced this with the hospital's surveillance footage, which revealed that Kate had been closely monitoring his actions. This only deepened his doubts about her involvement. Michael quickly rushed to find both of them, only to find that the hospital room was empty. In his desperation, he sought out the man who had been eavesdropping earlier. The man revealed that he knew both Jay and Kate. It turned out that he and Jay were high school classmates, and Kate had been a student teacher at the school. The man further explained that there were rumors about Kate's wealthy and influential family background, along with her high possessiveness. If she wanted something, she would stop at nothing to obtain it. There were also whispers among the school community about an inappropriate relationship between Kate and Jay. However, not long after, the man who had spread these rumors mysteriously jumped off a building and committed suicide. But there was something odd about the situation. The man didn't seem like someone who would take his own life. This led some to believe that Jay and Kate might have been involved in his death, possibly having pushed him to his tragic end. Upon hearing this, Michael tried to contact Lee, but her phone kept ringing with no answer. He then reached out to the junior officer, who provided him with some startling new information. The officer had discovered that Jay had no relatives in Seoul and had long ago enrolled in a boarding tutoring program. Surveillance footage from the community hallway showed that Jay had not left his room once in the 15 days he had been staying there. Meanwhile, Lee confronted Kate again. This time, Kate openly admitted to her relationship with Jay, but she quickly began to spin a story of victimhood. She painted herself as a helpless person trapped in a situation, claiming that Jay had used their intimate video to blackmail her into staying with him. Kate expressed how terrified she was that her career would be ruined if she left him. Desperate to avoid the fallout, she pleaded with Jay to stay together. However, during one argument, Jay had shoved her so hard that she collided with a mirror, causing her injuries. Fearing for her own future, Kate decided to frame the delivery man for the incident, hoping to avoid any consequences. Despite Kate's elaborate story, Lee was determined to arrest her. However, just as Lee was about to act, Jay suddenly attacked from behind, knocking her unconscious. With the situation escalating, the two decided to go all in. Kate urged Jay to kill the officer to avoid capture. Fortunately, Lee regained consciousness just in time, preventing a tragic outcome. Once Kate's plan unraveled, she quickly shifted tactics, pretending to be a helpless victim. Jay, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events, completely broke down. He desperately tried to escape, but Kate hadn't anticipated that Lee's phone was still in call mode, recording everything that had happened. The entire exchange was sent straight to the police station. Jay was soon intercepted by Michael and the others. Upon searching him, they found the listening device. Jay eventually admitted that the injuries on his face were caused by Kate. Faced with undeniable evidence, Kate confessed to all the criminal activities. The case was officially closed, marking the end of this twisted plot. The impact of this case was far-reaching. If Kim's forgiveness wasn't obtained, it could severely affect next month's evaluation. Lee, feeling the weight of the situation, carefully apologized to Kim. However, Kim wasn't concerned with the police investigation process itself. Instead, he was focused on the way people with criminal records were treated. His question was simple. Just because they had a criminal past, were they to be ignored and not given a chance to explain themselves? If this attitude didn't change, then Lee's apology would be meaningless. Watching Kim walk away, Lee couldn't help but think of her brother, who had been calling out for justice all this time. Returning home, she decided to ask her mother about it. To her surprise, her mother already knew that her brother had been released on parole. And unlike Lee, her mother fully believed in her son's innocence. Lee, determined to get to the bottom of things, used the technical department to track her brother's movements. She discovered that on the day of the fall incident, he had been near that community. Wanting to confront him directly, Lee considered her options. However, most parolees were required to temporarily move out of their registered residences for work purposes, making it more difficult to locate him. She asked for assistance in reaching his actual address, hoping to contact him soon. As Lee was processing the new information, she received a call from May. While sorting through her father's belongings, May had come across some materials from the Caring Medical Association. At first, she thought they were part of her father's personal items and had dusted them off. Then, she noticed a similar object in a corner and recalled that, when her father was still in prison, a volunteer doctor group had approached him. May began to wonder if the person in the photo Lee had shown her was connected to that group. Lee, still deep in thought, received the actual address of her brother and decided to visit the old house. However, when she arrived, she didn't find her brother there. Instead, she turned around and found Michael standing nearby. Michael explained that the previous night, after finishing work, he had witnessed John making threats. He had asked someone to investigate, which led him to learn that John had been released from prison a month ago. John had been spreading rumors in prison, claiming that Michael had not properly undergone investigation, which almost led to his death and ultimately resulted in Michael being wrongfully imprisoned. Michael had also discovered that John had a sister who worked as a police officer. This new revelation only deepened the mystery, and Lee knew that things were about to take an even more complex turn. Not long after, Michael received John's current address and decided to leave all his work behind to confront him. However, what he didn't expect was that before he could meet John, he ran into Lee. Both of them were curious about why the other was there. Michael, without hesitation, took out his phone and admitted that he wanted to confront John face to face. He asked why, after serving his sentence, John still denied his crime and cried out in protest, all while continuing to stalk him. Michael also wanted to know if John was involved in the recent case of the fall. Lee hesitated, unsure of how to answer. All the evidence pointed toward her brother, but she couldn't say for certain yet. She simply told Michael that the investigation was still ongoing. Soon after, Lee visited Dora and showed her the souvenir from the Caring Medical Association. Lee wanted to find out if there was a list of prisoners treated last year. As a doctor, William thought the solution was simple. Just check the fingerprint on the souvenir. However, Lee had already had the forensic team examine it, but since May had cleaned it, only her fingerprints were recovered. There was no trace of any other fingerprints, and even the seam of the object yielded new useful information. Despite this, William told Lee that even criminals had their privacy, so they had no idea who the prisoners were. It was another dead end in the investigation, but Lee wasn't ready to give up just yet. She knew she had to keep digging if she wanted the truth. At the same time, Lee took out her phone and directly showed them the photo of her brother. To her surprise, Dora, upon seeing the photo, called out another name. Lee was curious how she knew the victim's name. After William's hint, she realized that Dora was Michael's mother. When Lee saw Dora suddenly become emotionally agitated, she took the opportunity to leave. She had just left the reception room when she received a call from May. The caller claimed they could ask her neighbors if they had seen the person. Before she could finish speaking, Lee was interrupted by William. It turned out that just after she left, Dora hurriedly ran into the office and found a group photo from that year on the computer. The photo clearly showed May's father and John as model prisoners at the time. Lee knew that the two of them were acquainted. The only thing she wanted to confirm was the ownership of the souvenir. After bidding farewell to William, she rushed to find May's neighbor. However, the girl had drunk too much at the time, and the lighting was too dim. She could only vaguely remember seeing someone pass by, but had no impression of their appearance. Before leaving, the girl hoped that she would not be disturbed by the matter again, as she had provided the driving records and was afraid of retaliation. At the same time, William found Michael and told him everything that had just happened. It was then that Michael realized Lee had been desperately searching for John. He had always known that the victim in the fall case was acquainted with John, and he suspected that John must have been involved in the case. So, he returned to John's house. He recalled how John had recently either tried to run him over with a car, threatened him with paint, or followed him. Filled with anger, he smashed open the door, hoping to uncover the secrets hidden inside. However, as soon as he entered, he saw that the walls were covered with posters. Not only were there reports from 7 years ago about his fiancée's murder, but also his personal information. What surprised Michael the most was that he even saw a photo of Lee. It was then that Michael remembered Lee's recent odd behavior. Whenever he mentioned John, Lee would always avoid the topic, either intentionally or unintentionally. Meanwhile, Lee's phone suddenly received an alert from the sensor. It turned out that earlier in the day, she had installed a door sensor in front of John's house. So, she went to look for John. As expected, the two met again, and their conflict was reignited. This time, Lee no longer shrank back or avoided the confrontation. She clearly told Michael that rather than apologizing or expressing regret as a family member of John, it would be better to put that aside for now. What they needed to focus on was investigating the reason why John had been lingering around Michael. However, Michael believed that Lee's secretive investigations gave him the impression that she was trying to cover up the truth. At the same time, Michael stated that he would be the first to reveal the truth. At that moment, Lee received a distress message from the neighbor girl and immediately rushed to the rescue. It turned out that May, in gratitude for the neighbor's help, had invited her for a drink to relax. At that time, the neighbor girl was also worried about her own safety and planned to go abroad for work soon. She also advised May to leave the troubled place as soon as possible. Unbeknownst to them, while she was looking outside the house, the suspect was already preparing to strike. After arranging for May to rest, the neighbor suddenly heard the sound of a lock being picked. In a panic, she rushed to hide in the bathroom. Though she only saw the figure through the door crack, the same appearance was identical to what she had seen before. She decided to call the police, but the sound of the phone call attracted the suspect. Fortunately, she quickly ended the call and rewrote the message to send a distress signal. Although the neighbor girl hid behind the door and narrowly escaped, May, lying in the living room, was not so fortunate. Just as the man was about to attack May, the neighbor girl came out and managed to distract the attacker. When Michael and Lee arrived, they found that May had significant cuts on her wrist and thigh, with the wrist's artery being especially severe. Michael performed emergency treatment and instructed the medical personnel to rush her to the hospital immediately. He also asked Lee to confirm John's exact location. Unfortunately, the ambulance passed by him without noticing. According to the neighbor girl, the intruder was the same person who had appeared the night May's father fell. If she hadn't acted quickly and hidden in the bathroom, the outcome would have been predictable. She also regretted not being able to intervene sooner. Otherwise, May wouldn't have been so seriously injured. Lee comforted her, saying that the girl's actions had been very brave, especially since she had saved May. Additionally, Lee noticed from the photos the girl had taken that May had scratched the attacker's arm while resisting. He immediately contacted Michael, hoping he could assist the forensics team in extracting any DNA that might have been left behind. Hours later, May finally overcame the critical period and her vital signs began to stabilize. However, the nerve connections in her wrist, where she had been stabbed, could not be fully repaired due to the hospital's inadequate facilities. The only hope was to transfer her to a nearby city. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough time left for May. The doctors, however, hoped Michael could take over the surgery. Since the procedure required using a magnifying glass instead of a microscope, Michael was the only one qualified to perform it. Considering that he wasn't a doctor at the hospital, Michael immediately requested to transfer May to another hospital. Meanwhile, Lee keenly noticed that there was tape hanging underneath the hallway light and guessed that the killer had installed surveillance equipment in advance to learn the neighbor girl's door code. She then arranged for personnel to collect clues from the tape. At that moment, a young officer came to tell Lee that they had tracked John's location through his phone signal. However, when they arrived at the convenience store, it was already empty. They could only see from the surveillance footage that they were one step behind. The officer was curious why they needed to urgently arrest John. After all, his phone's location had simply been near the crime scene at the time. This seemed like an unreasonable approach, which didn't align with Lee's usual style. Lee had no choice but to tell him that John was her brother, and he was the murderer in the case involving her fiancée's death 7 years ago. Coincidentally, the victim was also Michael's fiancée. Lee had been secretly investigating to determine whether Michael's involvement in these cases was driven by his hatred. On the other side, Michael was deep in thought, looking at the photos he had retrieved from John's rental house. He was pondering why John had left behind a note with the words, "Where was he that day?" The next day, May, who had been in a coma for a long time, finally woke up, but due to the trauma, she had lost part of her memory. Lee reassured her not to worry, promising that she would bring the true culprit to justice. However, Lee and the young officer's suspicions were met with dissatisfaction from their superior. He believed that, without any evidence, they could not just fabricate a story. After all, from his perspective, if John were the perpetrator, why would he harbor resentment toward Michael? And why would he bypass someone he hated and target others instead? When it was discovered that John was Lee's older brother and his connection to Michael, Lee was left alone. It was hoped that Lee could clearly understand her identity as a police officer and not imagine things just because John had a criminal record. She should not be afraid that her future might be affected and want to eliminate her criminal brother. After all, a police officer must have substantial evidence to solve a case. Otherwise, it would become a tool for venting personal anger. Therefore, the superior decided that Lee could no longer interfere with John's case. Everything would be personally verified by him, including all of John's proof and forensic results. However, Lee still stubbornly wanted to arrest her brother. On Michael's side, a female celebrity had her prosthesis displaced due to intense movements in an action movie, causing difficulty in walking. She sought Michael's help. Michael found the issue wasn't serious and suggested making an incision along the original scar and repositioning the prosthesis beneath the muscle in the buttocks. At this moment, Michael's phone suddenly rang, and he was about to leave. However, the female celebrity was still concerned, so Michael told her to think it over before making a decision. It turned out that a few hours earlier, Michael had asked his lawyer friend, Sophie, to help investigate. Michael wanted to know the real reason the other person had appeared around him. He had also personally gone to John's rented house, but John was not home. At this time, John was working various jobs. With his poor acting skills, he helped the casino owner limit losses. Although he was often beaten, he earned a decent wage. The reason John endured all of this was because he wanted to consult Sophie for legal advice, as he had heard Sophie had won cases for retrials. What he didn't know was that Sophie was also investigating him. Soon, Michael received a message. However, Sophie was still unclear about why John was so determined for a retrial. She hoped that Michael would wait until she figured out the truth before meeting with him. However, Sophie also overlooked Michael's determination. What Michael didn't expect was that just as he was about to leave, the dean stopped him because the female celebrity wanted him to perform surgery immediately. After the surgery was completed, Michael learned that John had already left. However, from Sophie's words, he found out that John's actions were not simply out of anger. Michael guessed that John must have mentioned him. Sophie reluctantly had to tell him the truth. According to John, although he had taken drugs at the time and was a bit disoriented, he vaguely remembered someone panic-stricken fleeing from the victim's room. However, he couldn't make out the person's specific appearance. He speculated that it must have been someone close to the victim, as there was no motive for the crime. He believed the motive for such cases could only be a crime of passion. Meanwhile, Michael went to the police station to continue his investigation. However, he didn't realize that because of his departure, the plastic surgery clinic was thrown into chaos. The female celebrity, who had just undergone reconstructive surgery, suddenly began experiencing difficulty breathing. At the same time, the police tracked down John's location and quickly mobilized to arrest him. Coincidentally, Michael witnessed this and followed them. Soon, the police surrounded an abandoned factory, but once again, they came up empty-handed. However, Michael happened to stop John, who was trying to escape. Michael was eager to find out John's intentions, but John, after thinking for 7 years, still insisted he was not the murderer and had no motive to commit the crime. However, he was also curious about Michael's intentions at the time. Why was Michael so desperate to expose his true identity to the media? Wasn't this a tactic to frame him? Moreover, when John entered the room, the victim was already lying in a pool of blood. John was sure that someone else must have been hiding in the shadows at that moment, and that person was undoubtedly the real killer. Hearing this, Michael fell into panic because he realized that the flowers in his memory had turned into bloodstains, and the person in the dark was actually himself. Lee appeared just in time and stopped the two from fighting. At the same time, she arrested John. Given the police officer's prejudiced view of those with criminal records, John exercised his right to remain silent and refused to provide an alibi for the home invasion case. However, when it came to the case from 7 years ago, he spoke at length. Back then, he had groggily gone out to collect the mail and saw someone hurriedly running out of a room. After the person left, John made a decision that he would regret for the rest of his life. He staggered into the neighboring house and, by some twist of fate, walked into the living room. At that time, John had taken drugs and was in a state of dissociation. He didn't realize that the woman lying on the floor was already dead. Instead, he patted the woman a few times. It wasn't until he sensed something was wrong that he stepped back in fear. By sheer coincidence, John's right hand touched the murder weapon. These pieces of evidence turned him into a murderer. However, John was certain that there had been another person present at the scene. This was why he had been constantly lingering around Michael. John hoped his sister would at least believe him once, even if it was just to inquire about what Michael was doing and where he was on the day of the incident. That might lead to a clue. However, Lee believed that whether it was a retrial or a reinvestigation, emotions should not be involved. Everything needed to be based on credible evidence. At the same time, Lee was puzzled by Michael's recent unusual behavior. So, she accessed the internal system to check the files from that year. However, the records only listed Michael and the victim's itinerary before the incident on the day of the crime. But while reviewing the investigator's list, Lee saw her superior's name. She then went to find her superior, who immediately noticed her purpose. The superior was curious as to why Lee had only read half of the case files from 7 years ago. Lee explained that she could understand why John's statement at the time wasn't believed and why the details of his confession weren't specially verified. But she couldn't understand why the official records regarding the car accident Michael encountered on his way to the victim's house, such as the accident location and time, were missing. However, her superior advised Lee to stop probing further. After all, she was not only a criminal investigator, but also a family member of the perpetrator. If Lee continued to probe deeply, Michael, who had been saving lives, would be plunged back into the pain of the car accident and the loss of his fiancée. However, Lee was unwilling to let go. In her view, her superior had taught her that only an investigation that leaves no room for doubt is truly responsible to the victim. On the other hand, Michael received a transfer notice from the director, who firmly told him to leave by next week. The director also urged Michael to control his personal emotions. Otherwise, a doctor who puts patients in danger has no place anywhere. It turned out that as soon as Michael finished his surgery, he rushed out of the hospital, and right after he left, a patient suddenly suffered from difficulty breathing. After some treatment by the director and William, they managed to save the life of the actress and confirmed that the patient had a history of asthma. However, Michael was still at fault for neglecting his duties. Fortunately, the actress, upon waking up, didn't hold it against him. The next day, when she learned that Michael had abandoned her on the operating table for personal reasons, she became furious and shouted that Michael was nothing like the virtuous person portrayed online. Instead, he was a petty person who cared nothing for the lives of his patients. Fortunately, the director pulled her away in time. However, when they reached the director's office, the actress changed her attitude, afraid that her earlier performance might reveal the truth to Michael. In fact, everything had been part of the director's plan. He had orchestrated the actress's performance to help Michael regain his focus, to forget his past sorrow. The director was also puzzled by Michael's sudden transfer order. After some inquiries, he learned that it was all Dora's doing. After police investigation and evidence collection, it was found that when May was attacked, John was engaged in a fight with someone, and the DNA comparison results were inconsistent. As a result, John was released on the spot. However, Lee still informed him about the car accident Michael suffered on the day of the incident 7 years ago. But John was indifferent because no one knew whether the car accident occurred before or after the victim's death, and the specific location of the accident was unclear. Therefore, he was completely disappointed with the police's ability to handle the case and wanted to find evidence on his own. Just as John left, Michael came to find him. After learning that May's case had nothing to do with him and that there was no solid evidence regarding May's father's case, Michael speculated that John had been lingering around him not for revenge. So, what was the real truth? Lee then asked, pointing out that Michael's memory of the location of the traffic accident was inconsistent. He clearly remembered that he had been in a car accident right after leaving the hospital, losing consciousness. But according to his assistant, the story had changed. It was said that he had recklessly crossed the street across from the hospital, almost had an accident, and even picked up a dropped phone before taking a taxi and leaving the scene. However, in the police investigation records, his mother stated that the accident occurred across from the hospital. The scene shifted, and Michael arrived at the hospital where he had worked previously, wanting to check the emergency records from 7 years ago when he had been treated. Just then, a junior colleague arrived who happened to have been the one who handled Michael during the car accident and was about to transfer him. Michael took the opportunity to ask about the location of the accident or any other crucial information. To his surprise, the colleague suddenly went silent, explaining that the situation had been urgent and that there had been no inquiries or records left regarding the accident, effectively brushing the matter aside. For Minnie, in the blink of an eye, he secretly informed others about Michael's investigation. Unbeknownst to him, Michael overheard everything. Michael then tracked down the person behind it all and, upon entering the room, questioned why they fabricated the accident and made false statements. He also asked about the real location of the accident. However, Michael's mother did not to uncover Michael's blocked memories, as she feared he would not be able to bear the truth. Her uneasiness, however, only made Michael more determined to find out. After returning to the hospital, Michael postponed his plans to go abroad and began preparing for May's facial reconstruction surgery. Meanwhile, Lee found the person responsible for the records back then. This person clearly remembered that Michael's mother's statements at the time did not match the actual location of the accident, and the recorded time did not align either. Initially, he intended to verify it, but midway, he suddenly withdrew from the investigation. As a result, Lee decided to question Michael directly, but unexpectedly ran into May. May woke up startled from a nightmare. Initially, this was not a big deal, but it turned out to be significant as her blocked memories started to resurface. She now vaguely recalls some general characteristics of the culprit. Following this, Lee prepared to take May's statement, though May still couldn't let go of her original intention. She wanted to know how much Michael understood about his own past. Shortly after, Michael encountered an unexpected visitor and brought them into his office. This scene happened to be witnessed by William. This time, the visitor didn't hold anything back and directly revealed the location of the accident to Michael. The location, coincidentally, was near the spot where his fiancée had died. Furthermore, it was Michael's sudden intrusion that caused the car accident. At the same time, John accidentally discovered a clue. A watch in the casino owner's possession looked familiar. After some recollection, he realized that a similar watch had been present at the crime scene 7 years ago. He rushed home in a panic and finally retrieved the watch he had taken from the scene back then. With the evidence in hand, his memories of that day grew clearer. He vividly recalled that the person who fled the scene was Michael. John immediately made a phone call, asking Michael to come over for a proper discussion. At the same time, he notified Lee, intending to prove to her who the real culprit was. However, when Lee arrived at the scene, she found her brother lying in a pool of blood. At that moment, Michael appeared at the crime scene. According to Michael's account, John had called him over to overturn the case from 7 years ago. But just as he reached the door, he heard hurried footsteps and noticed the door was slightly ajar. When he pushed it open, he found John already collapsed on the floor. Michael speculated that there must be another person involved, and the motive for the attack was likely to avoid being implicated in the case from 7 years ago. However, based on the on-site investigation and analysis, all evidence had been wiped clean, and there were no signs of forced entry. From the fact that a fire extinguisher inside the house was used to attack John, a junior officer concluded it was likely the work of someone familiar with him. Coincidentally, the first person to discover the scene, Michael, had a known grudge against John, and that grudge also originated from the case 7 years ago. Thus, Michael had a potential motive for the crime. Now Michael found himself understanding the helplessness John must have felt when he appeared at a crime scene years ago. As the first person to discover the scene, Michael had inadvertently erased all evidence inside the room, leading to a situation where, no matter how he explained himself, the police disregarded his statements. At this point, Michael even began to doubt himself. Was it possible that he really was the culprit in the case where his girlfriend was killed 7 years ago? At this moment, Sophie walked in. It turned out that William suddenly recalled the person he had seen earlier and contacted Michael. As a result, he learned that Michael had already been arrested by the police. He then reached out to Sophie, asking her to come over and help quickly. Sophie, being a lawyer, had also been contacted by John. Due to her professional habit, Sophie had set her phone to an automatic recording mode. It was precisely this mode that allowed her to provide Michael with the recording of her call with John. Based on the call time shown in the written materials, the roadside surveillance time when Michael returned home, and the presence of another person during Sophie's call with John, it was fully proven that there was another suspect at the scene. Michael had just left the police station when he ran into his boss. The boss told Michael not to take John's words to heart, believing that the so-called evidence was merely nonsensical remarks meant to provoke him. After the boss left, Sophie reminded Michael that his suspicion had not been completely cleared. She advised him to keep his phone turned on, not leave the jurisdiction, and avoid taking risks or acting alone. However, Michael insisted that no matter what happens in the future, Sophie should stay out of it, as he feared involving her would put her in danger as well. On the other side, Lee analyzed the phone records between Michael and his lawyer, as well as the time Michael arrived, and concluded that the attacker could have struck Michael within 15 minutes and safely fled the scene without encountering him. Therefore, the culprit must have escaped through another route. At that moment, Lee unexpectedly saw someone lingering nearby. When she ran over, she discovered it was Michael. Michael, having the same suspicion as her, had also found bloodstains on the recycling bin. Soon after, a young officer brought the test report, which indicated that the footprints collected from the entrance and the rooftop railing, as well as the bloodstains on the recycling bin, did not match Michael's, but were connected to John. The people around also did not meet the criteria. At this moment, the boss, who had overheard their conversation, suddenly issued an order to exclude Lee from participating in the case investigation and demanded that any new developments in the case be reported immediately. Meanwhile, Michael wanted to know if the director was also involved in the alteration of his memories, but the director was unaware of it. The director also asked about Michael's next steps, wondering if Michael intended to continue investigating the real culprit from 7 years ago just because John had overturned the previous case. Fortunately, Michael understood that the focus should now be on the person who attacked John. The director was curious about where William had gone the previous day, but before he could finish his sentence, William walked into the office and explained that he had been busy helping Michael find a lawyer. Soon after, the two left the office. However, the director was also curious about the car accident Michael had been involved in years ago. William claimed he wasn't sure, as he had attended an academic conference that day and didn't return to South Korea until the following day. At this moment, Michael's mother called. Michael's mother hoped that William would not distance himself from Michael in the near future and would help guide her son, advising him not to think about strange things. While agreeing to her request, William didn't understand why the true location and events of Michael's car accident 7 years ago had to be concealed. Michael's mother only felt that being too involved with the deceased would affect her son. However, as soon as the call ended, she opened a drawer and found a dusty phone inside. It seemed that Michael's mother was still hesitating about something. That night, the John case finally had a new lead. Lee discovered a shadow on the roadside surveillance footage. She recalled that the person responsible for the case file had taken sudden leave 7 years ago and contacted them to inquire about who the person had handed the case file to before going on leave. The person said it was the boss. Hang up the phone. Lee looked at the figure in the surveillance and the reaction of the boss after hearing about the bloodstains. He then went to the boss's desk, ready to use his toothbrush for DNA comparison. At the same time, the boss appeared at the hospital. He learned from Lee's mother that John was very resilient, his brain pressure had dropped, and the results of the CT scan were good. He should wake up soon. So, after Lee's mother left, the boss prepared to solve John once and for all. Unfortunately, this time, he wasn't so lucky. He was caught by Michael on the spot. Flustered and wanting to leave, he was grabbed by Michael. It turned out that when Michael left the police station, the boss had told him to dismiss John's words as nonsense. But this was also something that only came out after he had just left the police station. And how could the boss, who had just returned the police station, know about it? So, lifting the boss's sleeve, as soon as he saw the wound on his arm, he thought of the bloodstains near the crime scene. Michael really wanted to know what the boss was hiding to have chosen to take action against John. Just then, John suddenly woke up. The boss, seeing Michael unprepared, seized the chance to run. However, he had barely reached the hospital door when Lee blocked his way. According to the boss, 7 years ago, he was too eager and completely ignored the defenses John should have had. He assumed John was guilty due to his criminal record and relied solely on the evidence found at the crime scene. He also pressured John with Lee's identity as a police officer, forcing him to abandon his defense, making himself a hero in the police station. However, an unexpected turn occurred. The record keeper discovered discrepancies in Michael's car accident on the day of the incident, both in location and time, compared to the records. Moreover, it was confirmed that it happened right in front of the deceased's house. The person wanted him to reinvestigate Michael. But everything changed after the boss met Michael's mother. At the time, she believed the criminal had already been caught, and it was better to let things go, fearing that continuing the investigation would bring harm to her son or the police. So, in the absence of anyone paying attention, the boss concealed the car accident. Now, he felt guilty. If he had continued the investigation back then, Michael would have been the prime suspect, and John wouldn't have unjustly spent 7 years in prison. The young officer hoped the boss could take out that watch and help solve the case from back then. At the same time, Lee and John, the two siblings, finally opened their hearts. Lee regretted her previous ignorance and how she never believed in her brother's character. John didn't blame her. Instead, he believed it was his criminal record that led to his sister's misunderstanding. However, he hoped Lee could catch the real killer. The scene shifted, and the police discovered that the watch John provided had been stopped at the exact moment of the victim's death 7 years ago. The watch, however, belonged to Michael, meaning he was very likely at the crime scene at the time. Therefore, after conducting a DNA comparison of the traces on the watch, the entire case had to be reopened for investigation. That day, Michael received a boy who wanted to reconstruct his entire face. It turned out that, like Michael, the boy had suffered from memory discrepancies and urgently needed to restore his appearance in order to regain his memories. However, The boy's older brother disagreed with the procedure. Despite his objections, the boy insisted, and in the end, the older brother reluctantly revealed the truth about that year. It turned out that the boy had not undergone facial reconstruction because of a car accident, but rather because he had been a school bully. On one occasion, he had injured his good friend, and the boy had been retaliated against, which destroyed his face. In the end, the boy chose to mask his identity and forget that period of memory. After the two left, Michael began to reflect on Michael's mother, worrying that he might not be able to handle the truth when faced with it. This made him start to doubt. Meanwhile, the young officer found the surveillance footage from the day May was attacked. Through comparison, Lee and the officer discovered that the person who attacked May and her father had the same body proportions and attire. At the same time, Michael's mother found her son and handed him the phone that Michael had dropped 7 years ago. Inside, there was the truth about why Michael had closed off his memories. The next day, the police confirmed that Michael had been wearing a watch on the day of the incident, and bloodstains found on the watch tested positive for both the victims and Michael's DNA. After the watch was left at the crime scene, Michael had a car accident right in front of the victim's door. As a result, the acting team leader decided to summon Michael and reopen the investigation. However, Lee objected, pointing out that other male DNA had also been found on the watch, meaning they needed to gather more information before confirming their direction. Otherwise, it could result in a wrongful judgment, just leak with John. The young officer, however, believed they should proceed with summoning Michael for questioning, especially since rumors had circulated that Michael was about to go abroad for work. Therefore, the acting team leader decided to summon him first. What surprised everyone was that neither at Michael's home nor in the hospital where he worked could anyone find Michael. It was as if he had somehow known the results of the investigation in advance and had fled. On the other hand, Lee recalled John's words, stating that Michael did not seem like someone who would flee. At this moment, Lee received a call from the head of the DNA identification team. With the results finally revealed a new, unfamiliar DNA profile, Lee immediately rushed downstairs to apprehend the real culprit while also inquiring about Michael's whereabouts from a small police officer. The officer informed him that Michael had fled in fear of the law, and he was planning to report it and issue an arrest warrant. However, when Lee reached the ground floor, he spotted Michael. It turned out that Michael had found a photograph from 7 years ago on his phone, which depicted his fiancée with another man. Following this, Lee grabbed Michael, intending to help him recover his memories. Just then, the small police officer witnessed the entire scene. On the other side, John, in order to uncover the truth, voluntarily suggested hypnosis. This time, John not only clearly saw Michael but also unexpectedly discovered another person. Michael immediately pursued the lead. Lee brought Michael here, hoping he would also cooperate with the hypnosis, as Michael remembered there was another person at the scene. Additionally, the DNA extracted from May's nails matched the DNA found on the watch at the crime scene from 7 years ago. This meant that the person who killed May's father had staged a suicide and then attempted to eliminate the witness, which led to the attack on May. Now, with the involvement of the case from 7 years ago, where Michael's fiancée was killed, it means that the criminal is not only the same person, but has been constantly around Michael, both in the past and present. However, after being hypnotized, Michael did indeed discover that person. There was physical contact between the two, and the mask of the other person was torn off. Yet, despite Michael's shock, he could not recall the person's face, no matter how hard he tried. The hypnotist speculated that in this situation, Michael's brain was refusing to recall that memory. At this moment, Lee received a call from a small police officer, urging him to quickly bring Michael back. It turned out that the temporary team leader was throwing a fit at the police station. He was unhappy that Lee had taken the so-called suspect, feeling that it damaged the reputation of the officers. Just as he ordered Michael's forced capture, Michael voluntarily arrived at the police station and handed over the phone he had used 7 years ago. According to Michael, the phone had been taken by his mother for safekeeping 7 years ago and was only recently returned to him. As for the photos of his fiancée with a stranger, they were transmitted through online methods, and he and his fiancée never paid attention to such photos. Now, by confirming who sent them, they could identify the real culprit. Lee and the others reported the evidence they had gathered truthfully. The team leader immediately issued an order. Since it was a crime committed by someone familiar, the investigation should start with people close to Michael. Their DNA would be compared with the DNA found under May's nails. At this point, Lee took out a keychain, explaining that it had been found at the balcony where May's father fell. This keychain happened to be a souvenir from a medical service event. Additionally, several people who were most familiar to Michael had participated in this event. Lee had also analyzed with the small police officer that the keychain might not only belong to participants, but medical staff at the time might also have kept one as a memento. Meanwhile, Michael also began searching for clues. After some effort, he finally found information about the unfamiliar man in the photo. Soon, Michael tracked down a witness. According to the witness's recollection, his fiancée had received photos of her being secretly photographed several times. Initially, he was worried that Michael might misunderstand, so his fiancée didn't pay much attention to it. However, she suspected that the person taking the photos had malicious intent, or perhaps wanted to ruin their wedding. Now that his fiancée had passed away, she returned the computer that had been left with her to Michael. However, she didn't expect Michael to only come for it after 7 years. On the police side, the most likely suspects were quickly summoned for questioning. However, after being questioned, they seemed to have no direct involvement, though each of them had some unresolved doubts. As William stated, Michael's mother had done him a favor, and he was as close as a brother to Michael. On the day of the fall, he happened to be drunk at a bar and went straight home to sleep afterward. He claimed he had lost the keychain, but suggested that the director should have won. However, the director said that the keychain from the display case had already been lost. He also mentioned that he was a middle-aged man living alone, and on the day May's father fell, he happened to be at home, so he couldn't provide an alibi. As for Michael's mother, the organizer of the event, she believed there was no need to keep such a worthless keychain, as she frequently hosted events. As for the investigation records, which mentioned her disapproval of her son's marriage, Michael's mother didn't refute it, but deliberately changed the topic. Regarding the concealment of her son's accident and the matter of keeping the phone, she chose to remain silent. When asked whether she had taken or sent the photos on the phone, she claimed not to remember doing such a thing. However, in reality, Michael's mother had privately hired a detective agency to gather information for her. On the other hand, after Michael retrieved his fiancée's computer, he began attempting to crack the password. However, even after the computer was locked, he couldn't open it. At this moment, William suddenly paid a visit. As soon as he entered, he began probing into the truth of the case, which inadvertently triggered Michael. He started to slowly express his frustration, feeling that after being with his fiancée for so long, he knew nothing about her. Now, he could only rely on vague memories to quickly catch the real culprit. However, William disagreed. He told Michael that after finding the true culprit, everything might change. The next day, the director did not understand why a simple reconstructive surgery had to be performed with William. Clearly, Michael alone could have handled it. Could it be that William had volunteered to help? But Michael, unconcerned, thought that the two of them would actually have an easier time. After leaving the director's office, Michael asked someone to help crack the password. However, Michael couldn't guarantee that the data would remain after resetting the password. But he carefully noticed that 3 numbers on the buttons were worn down severely, guessing they might be related to the password. Coincidentally, the day he met his fiancée, those same numbers appeared. So, this time, he successfully unlocked the computer. However, before he could carefully check the contents inside, May's surgery was already ready. However, lying on the operating table, May was terrified to discover that the person performing her surgery, William, was the same person who attacked her that night. She wanted to scream for help, but the effects of the anesthesia made her fall into a deep sleep. In her dream, May once again experienced the despair from that time. On the other side, Lee, after several days of observation, discovered that William had no alibi, and his physique resembled the suspect in the surveillance footage. At that moment, she received a call from a junior officer. After several days of thorough investigation, they finally found the location where the person who attacked May had ended up, which was near the hospital where Michael worked. Lee couldn't help but recall that, Whether it was May's home address or the presence of witnesses, William had been lurking nearby. As for May, it was suspected that she had been stalked on the day she was attacked. La then went to the Traffic Information Center and asked them to help check the surveillance footage of her vehicle when it passed near May's home. It was confirmed that William had been following her the entire time. Lai realized that May was very likely in danger again, so she immediately rushed to the hospital. May had just woken up from a nightmare. She immediately turned around, grabbed a notebook beside her, and quickly sketched the features of the attacker from her memory. Then, she used her phone to access information about the hospital's doctors. After comparing the details, May immediately left her room. However, she hadn't gone far when she saw a shadow. May quickly hid in the adjacent room. Although William saw the door shake, he didn't pay much attention to it, and instead walked straight to May's room. Upon entering, he found it empty. William immediately realized that May had regained her memory, so he rushed to the room she had just been in. Seeing it was empty, he chased after her into the stairwell, briefly glancing up and down. It was just at that moment that he spotted May. William quickly followed and charged down the stairs after her. The movements of the two attracted Michael's attention. It turned out that after finishing the surgery, he had returned to his office and recognized William through the reflection in a photo. Although Michael didn't understand the reason behind it, recalling William's strange look during the surgery made him realize that May was in danger. However, when he arrived at her room, it was empty. It was during this chase that Michael unexpectedly saw William turning to go downstairs. The vague memory in his mind suddenly became crystal clear. It was at the same corner of the staircase where he had seen William looking up. While Michael was in a daze, William had already reached the underground garage. In a moment of desperation, May could only use the sound of a door closing to lure William, then quietly hide behind a wall. However, when William opened the door, he sensed something was off. He then repeated his tactic of closing the door, taking off his glasses, and closing his eyes to carefully listen to the surroundings. Soon, he heard May stealthily descending the stairs. Thus, another round of chasing began. In the blink of an eye, William had cornered May in the underground storage. Just as he was about to open the door and strike, he was unexpectedly interrupted by a patrolling security guard. At that moment, his phone suddenly rang. It turned out that the director, noticing May had suddenly left her room and forgotten her phone, had grown suspicious of William. He hurriedly contacted him, instructing him to proceed with the surgery. It was this call that allowed May to escape the crisis. In reality, the director had already canceled William's surgery and, for safety, had called off all surgeries in the hospital. Meanwhile, Michael finally found the panicked May. Seeing the drawing on the floor that resembled William, combined with the clues provided by Lee, Michael took May to the police station. Before leaving, Lee asked Michael to wait for the autopsy results and to avoid acting alone. However, with a hurried glance in the hallway, Michael had fully regained his lost memory. He also realized that his fiancée had long known that William was the one who had secretly taken and sent the photos. Meanwhile, May shared her recent encounter with Lee. She couldn't understand why William wanted to kill her father. There didn't seem to be any connection between them. It couldn't be because her father had a criminal record or because he was poor and causing trouble in the hospital, making their family seem insignificant and deserving of being mistreated. But without decisive evidence, Lee couldn't immediately issue an arrest order. However, Lee still instructed the junior officer to lead a team to the hospital to confirm William's location. Once the DNA test results came in, she would immediately issue an arrest warrant. At that moment, William had just changed into his surgical gown when his assistant informed him that the surgery had been canceled by the director. But William, deeply obsessed, went ahead with the usual surgical hand hygiene process and entered the operating room. However, the director had long been waiting for him. Before entering, he had already investigated the academic conference abroad from 7 years ago, only to find that William's name was not on the list. Now, the director wanted to understand why. After enduring so much hardship to become a doctor dedicated to saving lives, William would choose to kill people, including Michael's fiancée. Unexpectedly, William calmly took off his glasses, then pressed the button to close the blinds. He calmly arranged the surgical tools and took out a scalpel. When asked why he was stopping the surgery, he replied, "Because I am not Michael." The director couldn't understand why William compared himself to Michael, but all along, William had felt that whether it was at school, the hospital, or even Michael's mother and the director, they were always comparing the two of them. Meanwhile, Lee received a notification from the forensic team leader, confirming that William's DNA matched that found in several cases. She immediately contacted the junior officer, instructing him to arrest William without delay. However, as the junior officer arrived at the hospital, he spotted Michael rushing out. He didn't pay any attention to him, instead going to the front desk to inquire about William's whereabouts. It was then that he learned William had fled in fear of prosecution. He immediately contacted Lee and informed her that Michael was also chasing William. Shortly after, Michael's mother arrived at the hospital. The director informed her of all the crimes William had committed and expressed a desire to know if there were any other hidden details regarding the fiancée's case. After all, Michael's mother had strongly opposed their marriage from the beginning. Whenever it involved Michael, she would always inform William of the facts. She had indeed once hired someone to deal with the fiancée. Years ago, William fell in love with his brother's fiancée and wanted to take her away. However, during a struggle, the fiancée broke free from his hold. Due to an accident, she hit her head and fell unconscious. William, panicked, fled the scene. When the fiancée regained consciousness, the sun had already set. She had lost too much blood and was too weak to move, crawling painfully forward. She finally managed to get her phone, but as she tried to contact Michael, William returned and snatched the phone away. After confirming it was Michael on the other end, William threw the phone away. By then, the fiancée was on the verge of death. When Michael arrived home, she had already passed away. He tried to take out his phone to call the police, but noticed someone else hiding in the room. As Michael slowly looked up, the person tried to flee, but was grabbed by Michael. During their struggle, Michael tore off the person's mask and was shocked to discover it was William. However, due to an accident, Michael had forgotten this memory until a brief glimpse in the hallway brought back the locked away recollections. Now that the truth had come to light, William planned to destroy all the tools he had used in his crimes, including the reason behind May's father's death. It turned out that the reason was simply because he had offered to perform surgery on May. But May's father only trusted Michael, dismissing William entirely. That night, William went to May's house, took out mementos from past medical activities to lower the other's guard, and entered the house. It was then that he discovered May's father had left a note cursing Michael. At that moment, May's father realized William's eyes were full of murderous intent and noticed tape stuck to William's shoes. While he was still confused, William suddenly grabbed his neck and pushed him toward the balcony. Since May's father was drunk at the time, he didn't resist much and was easily pushed off the high rise. Michael quickly arrived at the fencing arena and happened to run into William. He grabbed a nearby foil and swung it at William, landing several strikes that knocked his bag to the ground. The tools that fell out confirmed his identity as the murderer. In a fit of rage, Michael grabbed William by the collar, but to his surprise, William revealed that he had gone to that place because of Michael's mother. It turned out that William had overheard Michael's mother planning to hire someone to deal with his fiancée to keep her away from her son. William then wondered if Michael truly didn't know about this, and if he had ever considered altering his memories to hide the incident and the real reason he had severed that part of his memory. The scene shifted as Michael found Sophie again, reviewing the photos of his fiancée's death. He quickly realized that the head injury wasn't as severe as initially thought, and the knife wound on her neck was clearly inflicted after her death. Michael suspected that something else must have happened during that time. Meanwhile, the police discovered from the photos that William hadn't intended to kill the fiancée. His real target seemed to be someone else. Lee speculated that the intended targets were Michael and his mother, so she immediately contacted the junior officer. However, the officer reported that he had been chasing after a false lead, as William had already hired a chauffeur to divert the police's attention. Lee then reached out to Michael, but Michael was still preoccupied with the conversation he had just heard. When Michael arrived at the hospital, he confronted William, demanding to know his mother's whereabouts. However, William believed that Michael's priorities were out of order and that he should first investigate his fiancée's death. William revealed that he had secretly followed Michael's mother and discovered that she had hired a debt collection agency to harm his fiancée. Determined to save her, William had intervened, but an accident occurred during the attempt. Michael had never expected that William also had feelings for his fiancée. But even so, as a doctor, how could he not know basic first aid? Now, Michael and William had both old grudges and new enmities. In a fierce confrontation, Michael accidentally noticed something unusual outside the operating room, visible bloodstains on the floor and Michael's mother's scarf, all suggesting that she was inside. He pushed open the door to the operating room, only to find his mother's lifeless body. This scene mirrored what had happened 7 years ago. Rage had completely replaced Michael's ability to think, and his eyes were bloodshot with fury. He grabbed a scalpel from nearby, ready to strike down his enemy. However, he couldn't bring himself to do it. William seemed to have been waiting for this moment, but Michael didn't let anger cloud his judgment. Instead, he remembered his duty. Yet, William's already twisted mind wouldn't allow him to back down. He dragged Michael's hand and thrust the scalpel into his own neck, attempting to drag him into the abyss together. However, William had forgotten about Michael's exceptional medical skills and the fact that they were in operating room. In the end, he didn't get his wish, but instead, Michael managed to save him. Now, William faced the full force of the law. However, William continued to deny that he had intentionally killed his fiancée, insisting that it was just an accident. It wasn't until Michael presented the photos and pointed out the true cause of her death that the truth emerged. It turned out that his fiancée had admitted that she only truly loved Michael, which fueled William's rage and led him to choke her in that moment. In reality, William's target was always Michael. The knife wound on his fiancée was meant to conceal the marks on her neck. Michael revealed the truth to William because he realized that the memories he had lost were intentionally erased, likely because he was too afraid to face the fact that, as a doctor, he couldn't protect the woman he loved and the helplessness he felt when his brother had murdered his lover. William, with his self-esteem issues and twisted mindset, had shut himself off from reality. Michael's goal was to help him face the truth, but even then, William couldn't escape the abyss of confusion. With the true culprit apprehended, John was able to clear his name, and after enduring the painful 7 years of imprisonment, he gained a deeper understanding of the value of life and came to cherish his family even more. As for Michael's mother, she was not killed by William. Instead, William had used a blood bag filled with tomato juice and splattered it on her, intending to mislead Michael into thinking she had been murdered. Now, Michael's mother had closed the hospital and planned to go abroad to join a medical volunteer team, aiming to learn more about human relationships and life experiences. As for Michael, who had emerged from his pain, a smile often appeared on his face. He would occasionally meet with Lai, and she once thought he was sending flowers to her. However, Michael quickly gave them to Ming, a former patient. Through long-term collaboration, the two had developed mutual feelings. Perhaps Michael's next relationship would begin here, and with that, the story ends. We will meet again in the next drama.